Okay, people, so back again, and in this video, we're going to be discussing your light meter. And your light meter is the part of your camera that tells you what shutter speed and aperture and ISO combination to use in order to create a correctly exposed image. Okay, so we'll go over that in this video. So you can see we're back on the back of the camera screen again, all right? And so your light meter is going to be found if you're using your LED screen or if you're using your viewfinder, it's going to be found somewhere on the screen. And so on my camera, the light meter actually is right here, okay? So you see these series of numbers. In the middle you have 0, and then you have a 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, and then a plus and a minus in front of those. That's going to be your light meter. So it might look different depending on what camera you have. And so I'll just take you back to this display screen, which may be what looks more similar to your camera here. But here we have my light meter again. So now we don't have it in that bar kind of sequence of numbers with the 0 in the middle. We just have it here indicated with like +6, right? But if it helps, go to a screen like this on your camera. But I'll go back here, and I know it's a little bit hard to see, but your light meter is going to look something like this, and I actually have a handout that I'll give you that will have a clear description of this. Okay, but you can see here that I have my ISO set to 400. This is my shutter speed, this is my aperture. If I move any one of these, so now I have got to 1/25 of a second, my light meter moves, right? And also you can see that with this particular camera, the preview of the image changes as well, okay? So right now, this little indicator here is between -2 and -3, and that means the image is underexposed. And you can see that here with the screen. Everything is really dark. If I were to make this image right now in camera, you wouldn't really be able to see anything, right? But if I were to change my shutter speed to make it a little bit slower, meaning I'm letting more light in through the time that the shutter is open, you can see that things start to brighten up. Okay, so this is starting to look a little better. And now we have the little notch falling in between the 0 and the 1. Okay, so that's going to be a +1 probably. The image looks, a bit better. If we were to make our shutter speed even slower, you can now see in the foreground here that that's opening up, but the background is starting to get a bit brighter, right? So now we're past the +3, okay? So that's 3 stops from this 0, and you can see here that the image is kind of blown out. So we might not want to make a picture there, okay? So that's the basic function of your light meter. And one really important thing to note about your light meter is that it's kind of stupid. And I say this because what your light meter is doing, it's just following the functions of your camera, right? So right now I have it at ISO. So that's, again, the sensitivity of the camera sensor to light, right? And your light meter is just going to say, okay, I'm going to take a meter reading based on ISO 400, but it's also only taking a meter reading for this thing we call middle gray, right? And so middle gray, the easiest way to kind of explain it is if you think about your image in a series of tones from like white, white to black, black, right in the middle is a gray, and that's what your light meter is reading for. So if you look at this composition here, we have areas that are really light, so these white kind of lights in the background, okay? Then we also have some lower highlight areas. Then we have some areas that are really dark, so underneath the speakers, for example, is like a black, black. There's some like lower values down here. But if we look at the speakers, particularly like this kind of knob area here, that's going to be closer to that middle gray. Okay, and so that is what your meter is reading for all the time. So when that is at 0, right, if we have our notch here at 0, it would say, okay, based on the situation, I think that this image is going to be exposed at middle gray, and it's going to look like, that, for example. Okay? So it gets a little bit tricky, and there's a whole system that's associated with different tones. But for your purposes, you just need to kind of know that, okay, my camera is going to think that my light meter is reading for middle gray. So you're going to have to go ahead and compensate for that when you're making an image, right? Because, for example, if you were to like shift the composition and kind of turn it towards the sky, right? So then like things kind of change a little bit, right? Maybe not so much because the lighting in here is pretty even, right? So if we weren't to incorporate this area and we were going to want our lights to be exposed at a lower value, we would need to change our exposures. And you can see here, looking at the light meter, now it's still down to that 0 area, whereas like this area down here where we were composing before is really, really dark. Okay, so it depends on the lighting situation. I'm going to go and shift this back here. Okay, you can see your light meter shifted down again. So it's going to take a little bit of experimentation in order to completely understand this. But luckily for you, with digital photography, you have a lot of images at your disposal, meaning that because it's stored digitally, you're not limited to how many images you can make at one time. You're just limited to like the capacity of your storage on your SD card. Versus where if you were to have film, you might have only like 1 exposure or 5 exposures or 36 exposures. Okay. Now some of you may need to engage your light meter. For me, my light meter is kind of constantly going, and if you're using your LED screen as a way to shoot, then that might be the case as well. But just like your autofocus, which we discussed in a different video, you may need to activate your light meter by pushing down your shutter halfway, okay? So again, it's not for all cameras. Some of the newer cameras, I think, have the light meter just active all the time. But for some older cameras, you might have, if you're looking through the viewfinder or if you're looking through your LED screen and you see nothing there, you might need to press down your shutter halfway in order to activate your light meter. So for example, I've turned off all the information on this display with this button. Now I can't see anything. I can't really read my light meter. I don't know what I'm focusing at or what I'm exposing at. If I were to move something, so I move my shutter speed, it would come up. But for you, you may need to just press your shutter halfway down. Then the light meter will come up. Okay? And that's the basics to your light meter. Again, it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to. You should be consulting your light meter with every single composition. And that's particularly true if you're shooting with a DSLR camera. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier when I went over my camera, I'm shooting with a mirrorless camera, meaning that this image that you see here is a digital projection through the camera. If you're photographing with a DSLR camera, the light is actually coming through the lens and it's striking the mirror on the camera and being projected out through the viewfinder. And if you need a review on this, go back to the video I did about the mechanics of the DSLR and the mirrorless camera. Okay, so I just want to say that with my camera and with most mirrorless cameras, because it's the digital projection, that preview of what the exposure is going to look like is going to happen immediately. However, if you're photographing with the DSLR and you're using your viewfinder, what you're seeing is not what actually is being captured on the digital sensor. It's just a projection of the light that's coming through the lens. And so this is where the light meter becomes super critical, because you may think that you're making the correct exposure based on what you're seeing coming through the lens, But when you engage your shutter and that mirror flips up and the light is recorded on your sensor, it might not be the correct exposure because you're not seeing it as you're looking through your viewfinder. Okay, so that's just something you need to keep in mind if you're shooting with a DSLR camera. But regardless of what camera you're shooting with, I do want you to consult your light meter every single time you make an image, just because it's critical as far as making exposures with the appropriate amount of light. All right, so we'll see you next time, and good luck.